And I think the hypocrisy where you see elites pushing multiculturalism, pushing open borders, mass migration, when they've never really made the case as to why the average American benefits from it or needs to have it. They just say diversity is our strength, and that's where they end the sentence. And I think to that point, right, when you read the limited inquiries that they've had into the whole grooming gang escapades, what do they always say? Oh, well, the police didn't go into it because they didn't want to start race riots.
Well, we are back on Piers Morgan Uncensored today, and this whole grooming gang, child sexualization scandal in the UK is still top of the news right now. Thanks greatly to Elon Musk amplifying it on X. And now Piers Morgan's had several interviews with various people. Today he's got an interesting panel. He's got himself. Earlier in this interview, he talked to Jordan Peterson. Now he's talking to a few people, including this American woman, whose name I don't know. As you just heard, she sounds pretty based. She says multiculturalism is failed. It's something which is being pushed on Western countries, even though there's no reason is ever given as to why we should accept multiculturalism or even why it's a benefit to us. And he's got a couple other people on the panel, a couple other establishment shills, and then another woman who seems pretty based herself. So let's see what Piers has to say. By the way, Piers is also covering his ass on this because he's known about this for a long time. He was part of the British establishment media for many years. And he's hated Tommy Robinson, the main guy, you know, sort of the hero, if you like, of this, a man with a storied background, but who has been talking about this and trying to get the message out for going on 20 years now. So let's get back into it and see how this goes. It might get ugly, so strap in.
Or anything like that. I think the reason why this is such a tricky debate is because religions don't exist in and of themselves uniquely. Like religions also develop alongside cultures, for example. So the reason why, again, you see no representation of Bangladeshi British people in these rape scandals, but you see it's almost predominantly Pakistani men. And I use the word Pakistani and Bangladeshi instead of Muslim because they're both basically Muslim, right? It's because of the culture, and it's like a.
But that's why
storm.
I don't like the generalised talk about Muslims. Like when Tommy Robinson says after 7/7, this is my message. All Muslims are complicit. Well, that's an Islam vote, right?
There are countries with Muslims that have different cultures to other countries with different Muslims. I mean, the Muslims I grew up in West Africa, for example, are fundamentally different.
I can tell you, I've travelled to many Muslim countries. There's a lot of good in Muslim countries, and there's some bad, as there is in a lot of our Western European
Hindu,
countries, right? You know, and when I hear them talk about us, trust me, it's not a compliment.
Well, I mean, don't the Qataris mock us for like putting our parents in care homes when
we
care more about our dogs than our families?
They mock us for pretty much all of it. Let me bring in Natalie, who's been waiting very patiently over in Washington. Natalie, a lot of Americans seem to have a very sort of simplistic view of this, which is British multiculturalism is to blame. That's why this has happened.
Yeah, very simplistic view, because if that entire community had not been allowed to be in the UK in the first place, this never would have happened. And by the way, it's still going on. And by the way, it's going on in other European countries. Apparently, it's even going on in my country, where I live, Belgium, my adopted country, I should say. If you've been watching my channel, you know that I was born and raised in the United States, but I've lived in Belgium for over 30 years. And there's there's been plenty of scandals in Belgium, but I've just been recently made aware of another one here, which I may get into in another video. So, yeah, you can go on, as Piers Morgan's is going to do over and over, and as I've seen him do over and over in recent days, about how it's only a small percentage of the population of this group that's doing it. Yeah, that's true. Nobody's saying that all Muslims are criminals and rapists. Nobody's saying that. But the fact is, you allowed a huge parallel society to develop in your country, which has a significant proportion of which, it doesn't matter if it's a small proportion, but it's a proportion big enough to cause major problems. And they have been engaging in major crimes. And that is a problem, and it just should never have been allowed. What's the point? What is the point?
I would argue, having lived here all my life, on and off, that multiculturalism has been very successful largely in the UK. We're known as a very tolerant and multicultural country with actually not many problems like this. This is a scandal involving a group of people from a very particular demographic of Muslims, specifically British Pakistani Muslims. And in the same way that separately we had a scandal of extremists attaching themselves to ISIS and committing acts of terror for a few years, and that got resolved, this has been dealt with not adequately, but will now, I'm sure, be dealt with adequately. Why should we blame multiculturalism in totality for this?
Sure, well, I don't really think that tolerance should be the paramount virtue if the disparate cultures that you're importing into said country are cultures that, frankly, I think are conducive to gang raping of young girls. If you read the Quran, I mean, young women, pedophilia isn't something that's totally out of the blue. It's codified in that text. And I think why it resonates so strongly in America, and I know your analysis of it was maybe a little bit reductive, but it's because that's the lived experience of a lot of Americans when it comes to the issue of immigration. And I think the hypocrisy where you see elites pushing multiculturalism, pushing open borders, mass migration, when they've never really made the case as to why the average American benefits from it or needs to have it. They just say diversity is our strength, and that's where they end the sentence. And I think to that point, right, when you read the limited inquiries that they've had into the whole grooming gang escapades, what do they always say? Oh, well, the police didn't go into it because they didn't want to start race riots or race wars. I'm sorry, these are the same elites who have absolutely no qualms or no issue with bringing up, racialized incidents if it's a white person being the aggressor against a minority. Just look at what happened in the case of George Floyd. So it's very selective, and I think it confirms what a lot of people think here, certainly in the United States, with the agenda of certainly mass illegal, and I think we've also learned this week, legal immigration, that there is some level of replacement, I think, of American culture going on here, and they do it by importing cultures that have nothing in common with the West. And our leaders will say that assimilation is racist, it's neo-colonial, it's not appropriate to say that cultures that have different values and standards than us need to adopt the shared cultures of the country that they're immigrating to. So that is not an approach to immigration that works.
Okay, but isn't it undeniably true that I think the vast majority of domestic terrorism in the United States this century has been perpetrated by white people?
Well, that's only because they've reworked the definition of domestic terrorism to include events like January 6th and people who are affiliated with MAGA. So I would certainly say that their classification of what constitutes domestic terrorism is sort of cherry-picked, especially when they prosecuted and persecuted every single Jan 6er on an individual basis. But I mean, the Biden regime just 3 weeks ago puts out a whole white paper, a new strategy to counter Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. I don't really think that that's the most pressing issue going on in the United States of America right now. And I think there's two compounding issues, which is what Dr. Jordan Peterson was getting into. One is the issue of mass migration at an unprecedented number in terms of the people who are coming in. Traditionally, America would sort of have on and off periods. Now you're seeing, numbers of migrants that are just completely overwhelming what it used to be. And there's no off periods, and you have a sort of societal superstructure and culture where you look down on assimilation. And if you tell people who come from different cultures, and oftentimes it's racialized or there's a religious component to it, if they're not white or if they're Muslim or whatever they may be, that if you demand assimilation, you're smeared and mocked as a racist. And it doesn't work, because these cultures, as evidence in what's going on all around United Kingdom, and there's similar stuff going on here. We have no-go zones in the United States too. It doesn't work. And Piers, frankly, I don't think you're correct to say that multiculturalism has been successful. I think if you told the girls who were victims of violent, atrocious rapes, I don't think that they would agree that multiculturalism has been wonderful. I don't think
well, I
Blake
would
and
throw
Riley's
back at you. Look, I would throw back at you this argument, which is that
she's pretty based. I like this woman. I have to find out who she is and check out some more of her videos. Let me know what you think of her, or if you know what her name is.
I got into a lot of hot water in America many years ago over calling for gun control after the Sandy Hook mass shooting, for example. The vast majority of mass shootings in America are by disturbed young white men. Should we use that as a reason to take dramatic action against all young white men?
Typical conservative approach here. Yes, every society has a criminal element. Every society, even the most successful, even the most harmonious, every society has a criminal element. Every society has a mentally deranged or mentally ill element to it. And typically in a healthy society, which will have these elements, every healthy society will, there will be people who are just, beyond the pale. They're criminal in some way, or they're mentally deranged or ill in some way. But every society, a healthy society, an intact healthy society, which is not under attack through wave after wave after wave of migration from alien societies. So any healthy society will find its way to deal with that, to deal with crime and to deal with crazy people, basically. But when you upset that stasis, it will find a stasis. It will find a balance. But of course, if you upset that balance, just like if you introduce an invasive species, an invasive plant species in an environment, in a what do they call it, a biotope, or an invasive animal species, you introduce some, this has been done many times around the world. Okay, we have a problem with X. There's too many whatevers. I can't think of an example now, but there's too many of these critters. So let's introduce a predator that doesn't normally live here. For example, there's too many prairie dogs or something. So let's introduce some coyotes to the area, and that way they'll keep the prairie dog population down. I'm just making this up as I go, but you get the idea. Okay, well, the coyotes kill off all the prairie dogs. Then the coyotes start reproducing out of control. Now you got a coyote problem. Before you had a prairie dog problem. And the prairie dogs probably were causing some damage or something, but maybe they in turn were doing something. Maybe they were keeping some other pest down or some other animal population down, lower down the food chain. So typically when humans intervene in this way, it just goes off the rails because there's always unintended consequences. And the same type of thing happens when cultures collide. And especially when they collide willy-nilly or purposefully, but without any kind of breaks on the process or any kind of planning. And she's right to bring it up, this woman. And of course, Piers Morgan is like, yeah, Mr. Conservative. Yeah, but, we can't just call everybody who comes in, but white people commit crimes too. That was his thing. Yeah, no kidding. Duh, of course. In European countries, white people commit crimes. Europeans commit crimes. Absolutely. There's always a criminal element. No kidding. But if you can find the crime statistics, especially violent crime statistics for European countries, and they're increasingly difficult to find because certain countries have stopped noting down the ethnicity of criminals, for example, in Sweden and in France. And why did they do that? It's because it was obviously clear that certain groups, certain ethnic groups, or religious groups, typically ethnic groups, were committing a vastly disproportionate amounts of crime, of violent crime in particular.
I mean, that's the analogy I would use. Or do you accept that actually...
I don't think...
Well, my point is, do you accept that they're outliers to the norm? That they are extremists, these kids committing the mass shootings?
Well, when 1 in 73 Pakistani men in that one town are engaged, I don't really even think that they're an anomaly or on the extremities. That is the mainstream culture, and it's certainly the mainstream culture when you're seeing at an institutional level for police officers to be covering it up.
To be clear, they were all almost exclusively members of the British Pakistani Muslim community. So that is a small number of the general Muslim population. Very small, actually. And so it's not pertinent to say it was a Muslim cultural problem, this scandal. It was a cultural problem amongst British Pakistani men, exclusively.
I don't necessarily know if that framing is correct.
It is correct.
There's a racial element to it.
It is
well,
correct.
I think if you want to have the uncomfortable conversation about Islam, it is sort of conducive to pedophilia. I mean, I don't necessarily think that you can reduce it to the idea that, oh, well, just because they happen to be Pakistani,
What planet
British
are you living
men.
on?
Ask her again about the white school shooters.
Where I read
Oh, here we go. Okay, the two Brit liberals are going to chime in here. On the other hand, they're going to chime in, kind of like Piers, saying, "How can you say that about Muslims?" And I agree. Actually, I think the fact that they're Muslim is a complete red herring. I think the black woman on the panel was making much more sense. It is much more cultural. Now there is overlap in a lot of places, but and this is also a problem I have with Tommy Robinson. His main message is, yes, the Muslims causing these problems. Well, yes, the men causing these problems, this particular problem, are Pakistani Muslims, yeah. But it derails the issue or the question towards a religious question, which is irrelevant, frankly. The fact is, none of these groups should be in the UK, whether they're Pakistani or Muslim, are not in any significant numbers. Let's put it that way, because we get back to the failures of multiculturalism at this point.
Answer that question.
It's nice to have a conspiracy theorist on the line. It's always good fun. I hate to pull rank at you and sound like a twat, but
Not a
both of my
conspiracy
PhDs are
theory,
in
it's
philosophy
called
of
the
religion,
Quran.
and I think I'm slightly more qualified to speak about the Quran than you are, and to suggest even for a moment that that document allows for, what it does is condemn non-consensual marriage and non-consensual sexual contact. Like,
I'd look up the rates of child brides then, and I'd see
the
what
real
countries
risk you
they're
have in
most
the US
prevalent in.
isn't multiculturalism. It's a multi-billionaire running the biggest social media planet, one of the biggest in the world, which has turned into an echo chamber of your ridiculous ideology.
Okay. Okay, you don't like Elon Musk. Okay, Mr. Liberal. Mr. Smug. I mean, just the ultimate Mr. Smug here. And yeah, whether you like or dislike Elon Musk, it's kind of like whether or not you like or dislike Tommy Robinson. It's irrelevant. You're just, if you don't like the messenger, that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant who the messenger is. It's irrelevant what the messenger's background is. It's irrelevant if he's a criminal or a billionaire. It's all irrelevant. What is the message? And is the message right or wrong? Is it true or not? Is it good or evil?
And the fact that you're telling us all and telling the British public, who we're proudly multicultural, and as someone that was brought up in multicultural working class Birmingham, I can tell you for sure that you won't find a Muslim there who's read the Quran and went, oh, you know what, it didn't rule out sexual violence, so I might just crack on with that. I don't know what planet you're living on or what you're smoking, but I'd suggest that you do a course in religious studies before you start chatting.
Well, thank you for the ad hominem attacks. I'm sure that means you have a really strong argument, but I think the young working class girls who probably grew up in the same areas that you did would beg to differ. I don't understand what you're saying. I've read the Quran. I've seen what's in there. Even if you don't think that my interpretation of the Quran is correct, I would point you to, I don't know, what countries have the most issues when it comes to child brides and raping of young girls and children. It's obviously a systemic cultural problem with Islam. It's not a problem that is contained or unique to the West. And I don't know, last time I checked, this whole grooming gang phenomenon is what contained primarily to Muslim men, and it really only started when you started seeing mass migration waves.
Wow, absolutely based. Absolutely based. Nice. She slapped him right back, and rightly so. And again, I still take issue. Well, let's get back into it.
I think this is so dangerous. This is so dangerous what you're saying. I mean, so in the United Kingdom, 1 in 3 school children.
I think it's dangerous to be importing men from cultures who are willing to rape young women.
So 1 in 3 school children are sexually harassed on the way to school when they're in their school uniform. That is not done by, to use your language, by just Muslim men in the United Kingdom. That is done by all men. That is an institutional misogyny problem. And I think we're doing
that doesn't mean
the victims of sexual harassment.
That doesn't mean we should import more of them. Absolutely. And I 100% guarantee you absolutely that, yes, boys or men harassing schoolgirls in school uniform, of course it's a problem. But it's being done by men across the board, I'm sure, of all different kinds of backgrounds, including these Pakistani Muslims, and including Bangladeshis, and including Indians, and including Africans, and including native English white people, of course. But if you import large groups of people from outside your country, from outside your nation, outside your ethnic group, just different, wildly different people, you're going to be importing at the same time their problems. Quite simply, you can't help but import their problems. And maybe in their home country, those problems, they have found a way to deal with those problems. They find their own stasis, their own balance. But when you import them to your country, it's going to upset the stasis that you once had.
Sexual assault and rape a disservice by continuously just talking about Muslims as a monolith, as if they're the only perpetrators of sexual assault. It's an incredibly dangerous thing to say.
The issue,
I think all
more
sexual
fundamentally,
assault and rape is bad. That doesn't mean that we should continue to
Well, that's
import
a good
people who have a
baseline to
higher
start with.
proclivity
Good, I'm glad
Sexual
we-
assault
I'm
is
glad we
dangerous.
agreed on something.
to engage in it.
But it's interesting that you're only concerned with Muslims. Again, the real issue here, fundamentally, in the UK and the US, is less than 1% of acts of sexual violence being prosecuted. That's the big issue here. It's one of sexual violence.
Look at how sexual violence is prosecuted in India. Well, first of all, look at the incidence of sexual assaults in India and then in Pakistan. And in India, it is at least reported to some. First of all, in India, the incidence of sexual assaults and rapes and all that is off the charts. It's insane. Pakistan, it's insane. In India, apparently, it is reported a bit. And in Pakistan, hardly at all. Don't even bother.
That's the one we
I
want to
actually take
tackle.
issue with that.
I'm
because
concerned
I think
when it's the mass importation and it creates a systemic culture
fine,
where
but
there are protected
How do you
classes,
explain
people
the
that
Boston-
police won't
how do you explain the
investigate
Boston
because they're going to
sexual
be
assault
racist.
I think the thing. Here's the thing.
I was Christian.
I think the point here is that on the issue of multiculturalism, particularly in the UK, we've not been honest. So
Ooh, based black woman. I like her already. Yes, we have not been honest. Let's see what she has to say.
a point that you made that I think is important.
I think
to
that's
everyone.
key to this.
We've not been honest. So people
There
have
was
such,
a general
people have-
terror. Actually, Jordan Peterson was right about this. The terror came from two different thought processes. One of fear of revenge attacks
Well, yeah.
by extremists, which I think was very real at the time a lot of this was going on. ISIS were doing despicable things all over the country and around the world. I think it was a genuine fear that people had. And secondly, a fear of being labelled racist.
Well, but this is the thing. People have such short memories in this country. The 2005 Birmingham riots were ignited because of a rumor of a black Caribbean girl being gang raped by British Pakistani men. Right? And that was linked to the death of 2 men. This idea that multiculturalism just works and you just have these, fringe people. Yes, usually these riots and violence are led by fringe people. But the idea that everything is hunky-dory between communities is a complete lie.
No, they're not,
If you
but
look at
I'm
many
saying-
black British communities in this country, a lot of their racial strife are with South Asian communities.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. And that's what I find very interesting about this whole thing. So if you're still listening, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think this is a massive issue, and not just as an issue in itself, the cover up, the suppression of this hideous scandal, but what it's going to open up. It's like a Pandora's box. And this woman, this based woman in pink here, is, she's not afraid to say what it is. No, multiculturalism isn't hunky-dory. Communities, different ethnic communities in the UK, where they're so tolerant, according to Piers Morgan, don't get along. There are issues. There are literally problems. And I would highly recommend, if you're interested in this, and I think you should be, because this honestly is a big problem, and this is going to erupt. And again, it's thanks to Elon Musk. Amplifying this whole thing right now. Whatever his motives might be for doing that, I have no idea what's in his heart or in his mind, but the fact is he has done it. And I think that's a good thing. It's going to lead to a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, and so it should. So if you're still here, I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave some comments. I'm going to be doing more videos on this, I'm sure, because this is blowing up big time. And this is an issue not just for the UK, but for the Western world in general, for Western Europe, for the Anglosphere countries. it is a massive issue. And the underlying issues, like this woman was just saying, are these two women, the American woman and the black British woman, whose name I don't know either. They seem to have their heads on their shoulders. They're seeing what the real problem is. The real problem is this enforced or this forced multiculturalism that nobody voted for, nobody asked for, nobody wanted, and nobody has been told why it is such a good thing. So again, I look forward to hearing from your comments, and I will to hearing from you in the comments. And I appreciate the like and subscribe; really helps me grow the channel and continue making more content for you. See you in the next video.